So now we've got the character posed. We've pulled all the elements of the garment around so that it's all lying exactly where we want it to be. We've even raised the floor plane so that when this is simulated it sits nicely on the floor. And I'm just going to double check that because I've reloaded in the file. So ground, so for some reason it hasn't saved that with the file, so I'm just going to make sure that's on, and that's something you should check before you start re-simulating. We had it set to 20 before, so that's absolutely fine. So now we're starting to think, right, we've got her in a pose, the dress is done. Now we want to export her. We want to get her out of this package into Maya or some other package of your choice, and then we can start to build our illustration, play around with shaders and textures and lighting and all that sort of stuff. Now at the moment, if we select our patterns, the particle distance is set to 20. So if I just go down to show mesh, which is already on, luckily, we can see here the actual geometry this is made up of is quite spacious and loose, so it's not very densely packed. So let's just select everything and zoom back in again. So what I'm going to do first is just jump this up to 10. Let it calculate, and as you can see there, the mesh is a lot more denser. Now if we click simulate, we have to let it simulate again just to update and add in, you know, this. It's got all this extra geometry in there, so it needs to start using it. So it also needs to do a bit of recalculating. So you just leave that, let it go for a while. I'm just going to stop this here, but what you should do is just let it run for a while just so it all relaxes. But a particle distance of 10, it looks good, looks okay, but maybe what we should do, be thinking, is maybe let's drop that down to 5. We want this to be quite high quality, so why not have the mesh quite dense? And I mean, obviously you could drop that down to 1 if you wanted, but then it's going to have a severe impact on the simulation. 5 I find works okay. It's not drastically time consuming either. So now let's just deselect those. If we simulate this again now, you'll see it's going to take longer. It's going to chug along slowly. But then it's got a lot more geometry to contend with. And there you can see now areas like the elbow here that just popped out, and that's because it's got that extra geometry in there to calculate that area needs to lie on top of the mesh. So I'm just going to stop that because it will take a while. But if we pan around, we can see we're starting to get a lot of these smaller creases into the simulation, which is exactly what we need. So I'm going to let this run for a little while, and then I'll come back, and all we're going to do then is just basically export this as an OBJ. So I'm just going to pause the video while I do this. So I've let this run for a little while now. And this is sort of the result that we're getting. We've got a little issue here of some geometry overlapping, but now is the time where you start to think, right, I can either play around and pull this around a lot more, play around with the simulation and let the actual dynamics fix areas like that, or because we're exporting this as an OBJ and this won't be animated, it's just for a still image, maybe we could just go in, throw this model into ZBrush, you know, and relax that area slightly, just touch it up a little bit. And that's another option. Once you've got your model, you can take it into anything else, add in more creases, change the topology, you know, do whatever you want with it. So for now, let's say we've let that relax and we're at a stage where we want to just export it. And it's quite easy really. All we do is go File, Export, OBJ. You pick your file name. Now I've already exported one here as Final Dress Export, so I'll just temporarily call this temp for now. Click Save, and then we get these options. Let's see if I can make this window smaller. Doesn't look like it. Basically, these are all your separate patterns. If we scroll down, We've also got the avatar object. So we don't want to re-export that, so we can deselect that. But we do want all the patterns exporting. Let's move this up. You can either have it as a single object, so it's just one mesh, or multiple objects, so it will export one file with all of the patterns separate. And if you notice, if you have single object enabled, you can choose to either weld the edges or leave them unwelded. You can also choose to make the garment appear thicker, and this will just add a bit more geometry around the edges just to thicken it up. So we'll just leave this for now. We're also going to check unified UV coordinates, and what that will do is export the model and give you the UV layout exactly as it is in this 2D window here, so you get the nice flat UVs, so that's very important. So centimeter as well, we'll change that so that it's the same scale as the avatar we're using. And you can even, if you've played around with textures before, save with texture files, and that will export all those textures for you. All you do then, click OK, and that's exported as an OBJ. So what I'm going to do now is just quickly load in Maya and just show you the mesh model in another application. So here we have the model. All I've done is I've just dragged the OBJ file directly into Maya. So let's just control space to make that a little bit bigger. As you can see, we've got an exact replication of the dress. There's an issue down here where she's sitting on the gravestone, but to be honest, we're never going to see that, so I'm not too concerned about that. But as you can see, we've now got a nice model that we can start to work even more on. If I go to Window, UV Texture Editor, just open the UVs just quickly, select the model, and there we have the UVs all nicely laid out exactly as they are in Marvelous Designer, exactly how the patterns are laid out. Now, the only issue at the moment, and this is something that's going to be changed in future versions, is it will only export as a triangulated model. But a quaded export option is going to be coming shortly. So now we've got the mesh, now we've built the dress, we've draped it, we've posed the character, and we've exported the model. So from here, the world's your oyster, really. You can play around with the shaders and lots of other things. But what we're going to do now is, in the next video, we'll take this mesh into ZBrush and we'll do a little bit of cleaning up and explore some other options of what you can do to this garment before you start to think about rendering it out. So, yeah, we'll explore that in the next video.